Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy. This is a Spyderco Gayle Bradley number 2. First off, I want to thank my buddy Dallas for sending this guy along. It's a knife that I've had on my mind for a long time, but I've never quite picked up because it's over 3.5 inches, and honestly a little bigger than I need, but I'm really thrilled to hold it and use it because it's an interesting knife. So quick size comparison here. Here's a Spyderco PM2 got going on. Here is a Rat 1 in D2 steel. So you can see blade-wise, the size is right about the same there. Spyderco Delica, as always, for tradition. Getting the Spydercos on here. ZT452CF. So it's a little smaller than that guy. Actually, by a decent margin enough. Let's see here. Shuragorov Hati, another big carbon fibery sort of knife. And what the heck, Shirogorov Neon. So, little bit bigger than that guy. So let's go on ahead and do the usual. Oh, and actually, just one thing to mention. This is actually a revision of the Spyderco Gayle Bradley 1, the GB1, which was shaped slightly differently, had a couple of small tweaks, but yeah, the first one was really well received too. So let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of the Spyderco Gayle Bradley 2. Okay, so on the good side, first off, I find this knife very attractive. It's a pretty design. With the carbon fiber, the M4, and the nice... It's a knife that I kind of like looking at. There's a lot of good going on here, purely aesthetically, and so I gotta give credit there. And the curves on it are subtle. It's very much a Gayle Bradley knife. I mean, it fits in very nicely with some of his other work, like the Spyderco Air, or the Spyderco Bradley Bowie, which is another knife that I'm kind of a fan of here. So, yeah, that's kind of a beautiful thing. I'm a big fan of the aesthetics here. Another thing that you noticed if you looked at my review video, disassembly, is that the liners are a little skeletonized. They've drilled out some holes to knock the weight down a little bit, and that means that the weight on this guy is kind of a non-issue in a lot of ways. Yeah, it's a little on the heavier side, but it's a little on the beefier side. 4.4 ounces is not a weight that really is concerning in either direction. Not too light, not too heavy, you know, it works out nicely. So that's good. Durability-wise, this is a very decent knife. It's a good working knife. There's no problems with it. It's got full steel liners. It's got a nice thick enough sort of blade. This is a knife that can really do some solid work. And with a liner lock that's very solidly locked up here, right at about halfway, there's no real complaining about it in terms of durability. It's got your generic 4-position Spyderco clip, which means you can mount it right side or left side, tip up or tip down. And it's the generic one, so you can swap it out for a specialized clip if you would like. So that's nice. The lockup on it is very good. There's no sign of play. There's no lock rock. It feels rock solid. Honestly, a really, really nice lockup on this guy, and a fairly thick liner lock too, so I'm not particularly concerned even about beating on this guy. One other thing that I'll get back to a little bit later, you can see here that with the lockup, there's actually a second sort of bar that's preventing you from getting at the lock bar. And the idea here, and it's supposed to be a feature, where if you're making twisting sorts of cuts, it is theoretically possible that you could kind of twist on another knife and disengage the lock bar and have the knife shut on you. This guy makes it very hard. Lateral motion can't really do that unless it's also accompanied by kind of a coming in from the top thing. So, I don't know if it's necessary, but it is what it is. So, there you go. That's a part of the lockup, and the lockup's good. The fit and finish on this guy is quite good. It's a tight chunk Spyderco, so there's usually not much to complain about there, and this is no exception. The knife is well made, 100%. This is a beautiful knife in terms of manufacture. So that's good. And then the final good thing is that the knife is very, very smooth. It has an incredible action. It's a joy to do slowly, and it flicks like nobody's business. Absolutely just beautiful. It runs on washes that are very, very smooth. And so even without any blade play, and even on just boring brass phosphor bronze washes, that is, works like a charm. So the smoothness on this guy is really a joy. It's a knife that flies open in a way that very few Spydercos are. I would say in terms of action, it's actually pretty comparable to your Sleesh Bowie, which is another very, very smooth Spyderco knife. That just, well, helps if I actually get the thumb stud in the right place. Or thumb hole. There we go. Trust me, the Sleesh does pop open if I'm not being an idiot. But anyways, it's similar in that smoothness with your Sleesh buoy, so that's your good. The design on it is beautiful. The liners are skeletonized, making it weigh just about the right amount. It's plenty durable. It's got a nice 4-position clip on it. Generic and replaceable. The lockup is good and is resistant to twisting related opening up, which may be an issue for some folks. The fit and finish on it is beautiful, and honestly, the action on it is just great. It's really super smooth and a pleasure to use. Let's talk about the grate, though. The great thing about this knife is 100% the blade. The blade on this knife is great. And it's great in a bunch of ways. I mean, it's pretty to start with, but it's also very functional. You've got this nice chunk of flat space down here. You've got this round part up here, which means the flat can very easily be used for a lot of good slicing tasks, and you're not trying to fight through belly or anything like that. And then you've got this curvy part up here, which makes it very good for actually cutting across things. It's very, very nice in that way. On top of that, you've got a nice little swedge going on here, which is not just attractive, although it really is. It adds a little bit of thinning for sort of a punching in sort of cut. Like if you're, cutting into a bag of sand to open it up, this makes it a little easier for it to get in there. Well, at the same time, the tip is not too thin or anything like that. So the blade is really great. It's also not that thick in the grand scheme of things. It's only a little bit, well, it's thicker than the Delica, but for instance, it's about the same thickness, even a little thinner than the Shirogorov Neon, which is an authoritative sort of slicer. It is about the same thickness as your Spyderco Sleesh buoy here. And it's way thinner, I feel like, than your Spyderco PM2. And so it's a really nice slicing sort of blade. Then to top it all off, the steel on this guy is CPM M4, which is just a beast in terms of wear resistance. And is just one hell of a steel. It's in my top favorite steels 100% all day long, along with M390 and S35VN. So M4 is a great steel, and so this blade on this knife is just great. It's functionally made, it's pretty, and the steel, it's just, I love the blade on this knife very, very much. Let's go into the bad, though. So on the bad side, unfortunately, first a couple of nitpicks. The sharpening choil isn't quite right. You can see here that the sharpening choil extends a little bit. It's not quite to the edge of the plunge grind, so you get a little bit of a pop up there. It's not the end of the world by any stretch of the imagination, but I would have preferred to see the choil go a little bit further out there to make it a little bit more legit, but that's okay. Other nitpick, this is a black painted clip. Those never go well. They wear, they get ugly, it's ugly. So I really do wish that they had gone with a silver Spyderco clip along the lines of what's on the PM2. I think it would have set the knife off a little better too, personally. This carbon fiber here is not fully carbon fiber. Hopefully you can see this, but there's a section of carbon fiber, and then on top of, it's just on top of some G10, and that's not ideal. I really do prefer a solid carbon fiber through, like for instance on your ZTO 450, which is just one chunk of CF, or even on your Shiro Hati. I get it, the carbon fiber is expensive, but I would have preferred to see full CF, reduce a little weight. But can't get too bad a shape there. The M4 steel I was just praising does have some downsides in that it is not very stainless. M4 can certainly rust 100%, and it's also just a beast to sharpen. I like sharpening knives. I don't love sharpening M4. I can do it. It just takes a long time if you're not using diamond stones. And so don't pick this up as a knife thinking, oh, this is my first knife. I'll just sharpen it up whenever it's a little bit of a beast. You can do it 100%, but you need to be careful. Get yourself a sharp maker. Keep the knife sharp, because if you ever let it go dull, you're in for a bad time. Also, I'll say the knife is a bit big for my taste. I tend to like smaller knives, and this guy is not a smaller knife. Both in the handle and in the blade. You're not getting all that much blade for a fair amount of handle here. And, I don't know. So it's a little bigger than I feel like it needs to be. I would prefer this guy at just at 3.5. Maybe scaled down a little bit otherwise, but hey, whatever. More importantly, though, the ergonomics on this guy, for me, are just not great. And the reason for that, I'll go into in a minute here, but it's not stellar ergonomically. A lot of hot spots going on. And then finally, I mentioned this little chunk here, which is designed to keep your thumb from accidentally, well, your fingers, that is, from accidentally disengaging the lock bar in sort of a twisting motion. That has never happened to me using a liner lock or a frame lock. I don't do a lot of twisty cuts, though, so who knows, maybe it's a big deal. But the upshot of that is that it's actually a little harder to get in and get at the lock bar on this knife than a lot of knives. Is it the end of the world? No, 100% no. But it's just not fun to use the lock bar. It's not really a great thing. And just, it's a bit of a pain. But this is bad rather than ugly because all you really need to do is get in here with a Dremel real quick, take it down, and and you're good. You're back to a normal knife, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. So I'm not a big fan of that particular little feature there because I think it's a solution in search of a problem. At least it is in my life. So that's your bad. The sharpening choil isn't quite right. The black painted clip is going to get ugly quick. The carbon fiber on top of G10 seems like a little bit of a cheapy approach. The M4 steel, not that stainless. It's also a beast to sharpen. The knife itself is a bit on the big side. The ergonomics are not stellar in the hand. It's not really, I don't know, it doesn't fit me super well. And then this little extra feature here is just not a great feature for me. Let's talk about the ugly. Okay, the ugly for me is the fact that the carbon fiber doesn't extend to the edge of the G10. To the edge of the liner. You can see there's this little gap right here, and that's just not ideal. It's kind of ugly because you end up with a little portion that just digs into your finger. Anytime that you bear down on this knife, you've got the liners digging into your fingers. You've got the liners digging into your fingers. It creates a bunch of little tiny hot spots around the edge where it doesn't need to be. On a knife where the liners and the scale are flush, there's no problem. Yeah, you might get a little bit of falling in between the two, but it's not like it's creating the two extra little edges. I really don't like this choice. It's the same choice made on the Gayle Bradley Air, which I also didn't care for it for. And so, unfortunately, that just, to me, really hurts the ergonomics. And especially right here, where you've got this really thin portion. Sorry, autofocus issue. You got this really thin portion, that's just nasty. And so I really do wish that they'd expanded the carbon fiber G10 out just a little bit more, because it would have helped the ergos a great deal. So that's the ugly. I don't like the way they did the liners relative to the scales here. What's the final verdict on the GB2 here? The final verdict here is actually a lot like the Spyderco Nirvana, in that I really like half of this knife, and I really am not a huge fan of the other half. I love the blade on this knife. It is absolutely stellar. Every aspect of this blade is really good. It's well designed, it's thin, it doesn't stick up so much. The steel is great, the shape is great, the thickness is great, the action is great. This blade is absolutely perfect for getting work done. And in fact, it's kind of got some resemblance to the Spyderco Worker, which is where the Spyderco line started off. But this part of this knife is great. The problem is the handle on this knife, for me at least, is just okay. Because it's got the iffy lock area issue. That's fixable, but it shouldn't have to be. The ergonomics on it are pretty iffy, unfortunately, with the clip and whatnot, but most of all because of this damn the carbon fiber not coming up the liners thing. And so you're just in hotspot city when you really don't need to be. And so, one half of this knife is a solid gem and the other half is just kind of okay. And, on the whole, if you average it out, the knife is fine. It balances out to something along the lines of, if this is a knife that you're in love with, then you'll probably like it. And especially if you've got bigger hands. That may be a big part of the issue here. But honestly, for me, it's not a knife that's super compelling because, unfortunately, you spend most of your time holding the half I don't love. So I really like this blade, and I hope they do something great with it in the future. Maybe the Gayle Bradley 3 is going to be a solid absolute gem. But as it is, unfortunately for me, the Gayle Bradley 2 is a little less compelling, at least on this chunk of it over here. Regardless, I hope this has been interesting to you, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of the day. And Spyderco, oh, please do more with this. Try some other versions. I'd love to see more of this blade shape. Bye now.